All right, welcome everybody. By my clock, it is 2 p.m. So it is time to get started on our last day here of the Illinois Forest Landowner webinar series. Just as a reminder, this is a combination of the University of Illinois Extension Forestry and the Illinois Forestry Association. Alrighty, and with that, I want to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter, Ben Snyder, a district forester with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources.
Hi, how's everybody doing? I wanted to, I'm excited about the opportunity to speak to everyone. I know the Illinois Forestry Association has a lot of great members and provides a great resource for landowners who are out there looking to gain more information about how best to manage their woodland. And so I am here to talk to you today about the manual for your forest, which is stewardship plans or forest stewardship plans.
Ben, we can't see your screen yet.
Oh, sorry.
There it is. Perfect. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. If you couldn't tell, I'm new to this Zoom meeting information stuff, so bear with me as I kind of adjust to doing a presentation without seeing my audience. So again, wanted to say I'm going to talk today about stewardship plans, but in a broader scheme, we're going to talk about some other information too. I'll start out by giving you a quick background on myself, and then we'll do a kind of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So I've been a district forester with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for 7 years, working out of the Murfreesboro office in Jackson County. Before that, I spent 10 years out in the Northeast in New York, working for a nonprofit organization as a forester, also doing some environmental research. Before that, I got my bachelor's and master's degree from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale in forestry, and also worked with the U.S. Forest Service on an engine crew. I worked at Custer State Park in South Dakota doing natural resource interpretation, and for the Army Corps of Engineers at Wren Lake and Lake Shelbyville. So today we're going to talk about some background on land ownership within Illinois, some programs that may be a good fit for your land. Maybe you're in some of these programs and want to learn more about them, or want to learn what program might be good for you. We're going to talk about the manual for your woods, which the manual, I refer to it as a manual, is a forest stewardship plan, which gives you the background information and the information needed to make decisions on forest land management on your woodland. And then we're going to talk a little bit about implementation of that forest management plan and how you can manage your land using that manual as a guide. And we'll have an opportunity for some questions at the end, depending on how long my presentation kind of takes as we go through it here. You can see the kind of the overview of forest cover in Illinois there on the side. So just a little bit of background on Illinois forest land. It makes up only 12% of Illinois land, but that's about 4.4 million acres. And private landowners own 82% of that land, with more than 170,000 landowners. Only 7% is owned by private corporations, and the average forest ownership parcel size is 21 acres. So you can kind of think about your parcel size versus the average size. 83% of forest landowners have never received professional forestry assistance. They don't have a management plan. They haven't gotten direction on management of their forest land. And 90% of forest landowners sell their timber without professional forestry assistance, meaning they typically just go direct to a logger, which would cut those trees and make the selection for them, rather than managing with a management plan or a forester to help guide their management actions. So private landowners have a lot of different reasons for forest land ownership. Some of those may be hunting for recreational use, such as hiking or horseback riding. May use it for income. They may have it as an investment. They may have it because of family heritage. It was passed along from their other family members. Or they may be good stewards of the land and want to do good management on that land. And so they keep that land to manage it and try to manage it well and be a good steward of that land. So try to think about, as we go through here, some of the reasons, if you're a forest landowner, why you own that land. It might help process some of this and get you started kind of on the right foot to figuring out what best to do with your land. So what causes landowners to think about managing their woods? Kind of similar to reasons for management, but a lot of the questions I get with regards to management are based upon some of this information. A lot of people start thinking about their woodlands because of the property taxes, whether they're high or they want to figure out how to make it more manageable to own that land. They may be offered money for their timber. They can get a knock on the door, or their neighbors having timber harvested and mentions it to them. So that's a reason sometimes people start thinking about those trees. They may want to know what their timber is worth, what kind of value they have out there. They may have recently purchased the property and are starting to think about how to manage it. A lot of people also think about wildlife habitat concerns and how best to manage for the wildlife that they're focusing on. And again, stewardship, I hear this from a lot of people. They want to be good stewards of the land and manage it the best way possible. So we're going to jump into forestry programs for landowners, and I'm breaking this down into two different categories. We've got state programs and federal programs. So the state programs typically are run through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So we have the IDNR Forestry Program, also called the Forestry Development Act, so FDA. So you may hear those two terms thrown around, and I kind of use them interchangeably. And we also have the Conservation Stewardship Program. There's a link there that goes to the IDNR page, and there at the IDNR page you can get more information about the Forestry Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program. On the federal side, if you think about or have been past your USDA service center that's in your respective county that you live in, you may have driven past, or maybe you've even been in there. On one side of the service center is the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they have the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, also called EQIP. And that program caters to people who own forested land, and it matches up well with our forestry program, state forestry program. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail in a little bit. And then the Farm Service Agency that's on the other side of the USDA Service Center, has a Conservation Reserve Program. Oftentimes that people who enroll in that have land that has a crop history on it, and that may be put into grasslands or tree plantings. And then that can involve a payment on typically a 15-year schedule. So if you go to the link that I have listed at the bottom of this page, you can find the offices that are in the respective county for the location that you live in, and find contact information for that USDA service center. So we're going to jump in and talk about the DNR Forestry Program. Like I said, it also is called the Forestry Development Act. And again, those terms are kind of used interchangeably. So the goal of the program is to encourage healthy, productive forest ecosystems through active management of that forested land. One of the goals of your plan would be sustainable timber production. It requires a minimum of 10 forested acres to enroll in this program. So if you've got 10 acres with a house on it, it's not going to fit into the forestry program. If you got 12 acres with a house on it, probably if the majority of your land is forested. So this requires a forest stewardship plan for enrollment, and that forest stewardship plan has to meet the FDA standards. And we have a detailed list of what's included in plans. And we're going to talk a little bit more about forest stewardship plans later on and go through that in detail to see why a forest stewardship plan might be right for you. So plans are good for 10 years. At the end of 10 years, you need to either have that plan updated or a new plan completed. The landowner has the requirement to implement that plan and kind of understand how implementation needs to take place and the timing of that. And again, like I said, one of the benefits of this is a preferential tax rate of 1/6 of the farmland tax assessment. So that's a bonus for folks who enroll in that program and choose to be active managers and good stewards of the land. The other DNR program that I'll discuss briefly is the Conservation Stewardship Program. Like I said, also through the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. The goal of this program is to promote the restoration of native species, reduce the impacts of invasive species, protect, restore, and enhance species in greatest need and concern, and reduce forest fragmentation. So the minimum acreage for this is 5 contiguous acres of undeveloped grassland, forest, or wetland. So it doesn't have to be forested land. And so it has a little bit more flexibility than what the forestry program does. The landowner can write their own plan, or they can have a consultant write a plan, but that plan has to be approved by DNR staff. And that plan goes to Springfield and their staff in Springfield that manage that program. And then the landowner is required to implement that plan. They get a preferential tax rate of 5% of the fair market value. The enrollment is good for 10 years. And with this program, one of the landowners are not eligible for cost share funds. So the quick overview of the Natural Resource Conservation Service Environmental Qualities Incentive Program. One of the good things about this program is that a landowner can enroll in the State Forestry Program and the EQIP program with the same plan. Our standards are meshed together. They're the same plan standards, so that plan can allow you to enroll in both programs at the same time. Now you have to go through a different process to enroll, but this kind of opens the doors to some additional funding opportunities. So this program provides technical assistance and financial assistance to forest landowners to address natural resource concerns and deliver environmental benefits. This opens the opportunity for more or potential cost share funding, which could help you implement your plan and to implement some of the practices that are required with the plan to help fund that. So a quick side-by-side comparison of the state versus the federal programs. With the state program, again, you've got preferential property tax rate on forested acreage. For the forestry program, with the conservation stewardship, that could also include grass and wetland acreage. You get technical assistance from the forestry program through the district forester, and depending on which counties you're in, your district forester would depend on that. And you have the potential for cost share funding may be available to help implement your practices. However, currently we don't have cost share available for the FDA program. And then on the federal side with the EQIP program, that also has you're eligible for cost share funding to help implement practices outlined in your stewardship plan. And you're eligible for funding for new plans and also receive technical assistance from the staff that work in that program. So before you choose a program, I think it's a good idea to kind of talk with someone from that agency. Depending on what program you're looking to enroll in, you would talk to different people or track down a different person depending on where you live. But it's a good idea to kind of talk with them make sure you meet the requirements to enroll in the program, and figure out how that process goes so that you know ahead of time what you should do to get enrolled. I think it's also important, like we talked about at the beginning, is to determine what your goals are for management, and that will kind of help guide some of this process, and may even kind of determine what program you fit best into. Consider how you'll implement your plan. Are you a DIYer? Are you kind of a do-it-yourself landowner? Are you going to try to DIY some of the implementation in your plan? Do you have the time to do that, and maybe some of the knowledge, or willing to go out and learn? Are you going to look at maybe more contractors to come in and do implementation of your plan and pay for it? Or are you going to use a combination? And I think that's probably the most common, is a combination of DIY on some things and using contractors on areas where people aren't comfortable doing the work. And then if you're going to enroll in a program, you know which one you're going to enroll in. Find a consulting forester to write a plan. I recommend talking to more than one. You can find the right person. Different consultants have different areas of expertise and experience, and if you find the right one, I think you can end up with a really good, useful plan that's going to be good for that 10 years, and it's going to provide you a lot of guidance along the way. So let's dive into the manual for your woods. Kind of like when you buy a car, it automatically comes with a manual. Unfortunately, Forestland doesn't come with a manual already made, ready, set, that you can open the glove box up and check it out and read about it. So you've got to come up with your own plan or get one completed. However, I think it's well worth the investment to get that plan, come up with some information that can help you make the best choices and decisions for land management on your land. So I'll give you some information about what's included in a plan. It's going to include some background information on the forestry program if you're enrolling in the forestry program or the EQIP program. It's going to include some justification, include management actions and what needs to be done on the ground. It should include how to complete those on the ground actions and give you some of the direct information on how you can do that work if you're a DIYer. Even if you're not, it gives you that background so that you can have some of that information to make good choices. Should have desired results, some of the what not to do, and most importantly, a connection to a forester who can interpret some of the information that's in that plan and how to accomplish your goals. So again, back to this, kind of know your goals. Some of the common goals that I see in forest management plans or forest stewardship plans is to maintain and improve habitat for wildlife. A lot of folks are interested in maintaining and improving habitat for deer or turkey, songbirds, other wildlife too. So it's important to know that that may change some of the implementation, kind of the way you get it done, depending on what you're managing for. Another goal may be to provide opportunities for hunting and recreation. You may want to protect soil and water quality. Managing the forest for sustainable timber production. Like I said, that's one of the things that should be in the FDA plan as one of the goals. Maintain and improve ecosystem health is another one, and forest restoration is a common one as well. So you can kind of think of other goals that you may have for management of your forested land as we go through this and talk about this in more detail. So in that plan, it's going to include a property location and description. There'll be a legal description for the location. It'll include the township, the county, how to access the property, so that if I come out to check the plan to make sure that it includes all the information that I can figure out how to get to it. Some of these places are not easy to get to. And it'll include adjacent land use, so that that's factored in and taken into account when looking at management. So here, let's delve into a little bit of the past management. I think it's important to know some of the past management that's been completed in general throughout Illinois, because this gives us a little bit of insight into how a lot of these lands have been impacted by management. So, during the settlement time period, a lot of the forested land in Illinois was cleared. Timber was harvested off of that land, and grazing took place in most of the southern Illinois woodlands. And you can see this if you go walk through the woods. You'll find on most forested land, you'll find barbed wire fence at some point in time, a lot of times on the boundaries. In some areas, the clearing may have been long enough ago, or the harvesting may have been long enough ago that you don't see stumps left, but you may see stumps that were harvested, by the past landowner. So you can see those impacts. Fire was common before the 1930s. Native Americans used fire, and then settlers used fire even more often. So fire was common on the landscape and impacted the way our forests look still today. After the 1930s, fire suppression was common, and kind of the Smokey Bear era came along, and fire suppression became the norm to protect those trees. However, kind of an unintended consequence was that allowed fire intolerant species to establish in our forest understories and get a foothold in there. Also, selective logging of high value trees such as walnut, white oak, and red oak have shifted the species composition. If those trees are more valuable and were harvested more often, we've shifted over time that composition of trees from more of those high value trees to more of the less valuable trees economically. And so that shift has taken place over multiple harvests on the same woodlands over time. So present day woodlands are oak dominant still, with a heavy canopy, meaning there's a pretty dense canopy. A lot of those trees were established around the same time period. So a lot of those overstory trees are kind of even aged, within 20 to 30 years of each other. And there's little regrowth of oak trees. And we'll talk about that more when we're talking about management. But there's, in these shady forests, there tends to not be establishment of oak because there's too much shade. Oak are not tolerant of shade. They're not a shade tolerant species. And so they have a hard time getting a foothold and establishing in these dense, shady forests. So in a stewardship plan, when a forester is setting up a plan for you, they're going to look at these different stands, what we call a stand, or an area where the forest is similar. So we'll start out looking at the topographic map. The white areas on the older topographic maps typically show areas that were open or mostly open, and the green areas show areas that were historically woodlands. And it also gives us an idea of where the uplands are, the lowlands. We can see the aspect and the steepness of the land, and this kind of helps us group together like areas for our forest stewardship plans. So stands, not deer stands, but the stand description and analysis should establish stands or similar areas for inventory and assessment. And the stands are typically similar in age and composition. So you can see, when you're looking at that map, stand 1 typically was forested and wasn't cleared. Stand 2 and 3 were more open areas historically, and maybe have naturally revegetated with trees and established. So those stands are going to look quite a bit different. And so we group those stands together so that when we do an inventory, we don't have a wide range of size, species, and a lot of difference within those, or a lot of variation. So on an ortho photo or an aerial photo, we can also see some differences in those stands. Stand 3 was formerly cleared or grazed, and it's an upland site. And each of these stands will have a separate forest inventory and assessment and separate management objectives, because we're dealing with different areas, different ages, and different compositions. So we're going to have different objectives for each one. So we're also going to look at the soil types in these different areas. And a lot of times those soil types for different stands, we have drastically different types of soil. The soil type may kind of determine the upland or bottomland, the type of trees that are going to grow well there, and the historical land cover. The soil reports can also tell us drainage, erosion potential, water capacity, a lot of different stuff that will be included and incorporated into the plan. And this information can kind of help us with decision making. So after those stands are established and set up, we're going to, a forester is then going to do the inventory on each one of those stands. We're going to use sample plots. We're not going to measure every tree in each one of those stands. That would take too long. However, we're going to use sample plots where we measure the trees in a certain area. We're going to measure in each one of those plots the tree density, or how closely or far apart those trees are growing. If you kind of think of a tree planting, those trees are small and well spaced out. And if you think of a mature forest where you have large trees, those trees are more dense and they're taking up more space than a tree planting is. So there's less opportunity for growth in a dense forest land. So we're going to measure trees within each plot. We're going to measure the species type, the diameter of that tree, the height, and the class. We typically group those into class 1, 2, or 3, good, fair, or poor growing stock. And we're going to look at regeneration. So the species that are regenerating in that stand, young trees, typically 5 feet or less. The size of them, the quality, how well they're growing, and how healthy they are. We're also going to look at, in those regeneration plots, the invasive species that may be on site or establishing. We're going to look at understory plants as well, herbaceous plants. And if we observe any threatened or endangered species, plants, or wildlife, that'll be noted as well. So when we're looking at kind of a layout, to give you an idea of what a inventory layout might look like, each one of these red circles is a inventory plot. The green circle in the middle is the plot center. So we have different survey spots located ahead of time to where we're going to go to and inventory those trees. And we want to have a variation of different landscape types, different elevations, so that we get a good sample of that entire stand. And in so a little bit of detail on the measurements that we're doing and all those, we're going to measure the basal area, which is defined as the cross-sectional area, usually in square feet, of a single tree at breast height or 4.5 feet above the ground. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. And we're going to measure the diameter of a tree at 4.5 feet above the ground, also DBH. So the size of those trees and the amount of space they're taking up gives us insight into that stand of trees. So to measure basal area, we're going to use a prism. So in the upper left there, you see what a prism looks like, and kind of see what it looks like when you're measuring trees. So and this takes into account the size of that tree, or the amount of space that it's taking out, as well as the distance that tree is from your plot center. So on the left, a tree would be a don't tally tree if it doesn't connect. A tally tree, like the middle one, if it connects. And we also have borderline trees, which we would tally every other tree. And that gives us an idea of how dense that forest is and how closely or far apart those trees are growing. So looking at a plot that we would be measuring the trees in from an overstory view, and our plot center there in the middle, we may have a variety of different diameters of trees, And those different trees would then all account for the trees that we're measuring within that single plot. And then multiple plots are what we're going to measure throughout that entire stand to determine the information about that stand, the density of the basal area, the size of the trees. That information will all go into the plan to help us make educated decisions on how best to manage that land. So turning that inventory, which is the on-the-ground part where you go out and take those measurements, record that data, make those observations, and use that information into a management plan, takes those sample plots that were used to calculate the stand-wide data that is used in decision making. So the basal area, the density, the average diameter of trees, the stand level and species level data will include also board foot volume per acre, number of trees per acre. We're also going to have, on a stand-wide basis, the invasive species, the type, and the percent cover throughout that entire stand, and a stocking percentage, which includes the basal area and the trees per acre. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, so you have an idea of how stocking how we come up with that stocking number and how we use that to make decisions. So data is used to make decisions on how best to manage each stand to improve forest health, regeneration, and meet other management goals. So the stocking is a combination of basal area per acre throughout that entire stand and trees per acre throughout that entire stand. And we'll use an example in the next slide, but for now we're going to look at those A, B, and C lines, which are our stand should fall into one of those categories. The A line would be telling us that the growth is considered too slow for typical forest management. The crowns are closed, the trees are growing very closely together, and it's a dense forest. And you probably would be losing trees to competition in that type of a condition. The B line is the point of crown closure of trees with maximum crown width. These are trees with no competition, yet no space is wasted. And then the C line is the lowest stocking level that will grow into the B line within 10 years. So if we have this stand, it'll turn into a fully stocked stand within 10 years. So this is an example from a forest management plan that I wrote a couple of years ago. Trees per acre shows us in this stand was 307. We had a basal area of 85. So after we did all those sample plots and calculated our data, we came up with those two numbers. From those numbers, we can put that into our stocking guide and figure out that we have a stocking of about 85%. So this stand is fully stocked. So when we look at that, it's kind of in between the A and the B line, progressing towards the A line, but still in the B section. So on a stand like this, thinning now will let more light reach the forest floor. And if we choose to do nothing, the tree growth and the understory growth will slow down as those canopies close and those trees get closer together and compete for resources. So if we were to look at this stand, an 85% stock stand, and the data shows us that this stand has a large number of low quality trees, poor form trees that established, probably a number of years ago, that we could thin the stand out. We could thin out those low quality trees, allow the trees that we leave to have better growing space and more room to grow. And there are plenty of trees that can be removed to make room for better quality trees. And we can open up this stand a little bit, thin it down to the B line by removing about 100 trees per acre or 25 square feet of basal area to allow more trees to establish in the stand. That'll allow more sunlight to get to the forest floor in addition to allowing the trees that are already established more space to grow. And we can get more regrowth or regeneration into that stand, and hopefully get some trees that are intolerant of shade to establish, and not just shade tolerant species. So we would get a variety of species growing into that stand. So other items that are included in the forest stewardship plan would include the history, the logging or management history, if we know that. It'll include detailed stand recommendations. So each stand should have kind of a recipe or a guideline for what needs to be done to best manage that land. It'll include some details on how to maintain and enhance recreation and aesthetics in your forest land. Also include air, soil, and water quality conservation and how to best do that while doing your management. It'll include information on wetland protection, how to determine if you have wetlands, and the proper process to go through managing areas that are wetlands or protected as wetlands. It should also include information about fish, wildlife, and biodiversity, information on forest health protection, information to tell you about threatened and endangered species that may be on that site, and then special sites such as historical, archaeological, cultural, and geological sites that are sometimes found or oftentimes found on private land, whether or not you know about them. There is a database that we search to see if there are any of those sites when we write a forest management plan. So your forest stewardship plan will include an activity schedule. This is an example from a plan that I wrote. So a plan could look like this. Again, like we said, you're going to have you may have different recommendations for different stands. A lot of times you'll see the invasive control put first as far as implementation goes, to make sure that we control those invasive species before we open up that stand or let more light into the forest floor, because the invasives are going to be the first ones that take advantage of that, especially if they're already established. And you'll see that plan needs to be updated in 10 years, or you need a new forest stewardship plan in 10 years, because that's the life of the program. So your plan will also include a listing of the requirements for enrollment in the forestry program. So basically, it'll tell you to implement the plan, maintain 300 trees per acre in a young stand. Older stands may have less than 300 trees per acre, but that would be a forest land too. It'll give you some other details in there. I think one of the important ones is that if trees are cut or sold, this must be recommended in the plan and must follow the plan, which means that a forester is needed to mark or select those trees prior to the sale. This also protects you, the landowner, makes sure that you're managing it properly and that you get a good price for your products if you choose to sell trees. You should document changes to the plan, keep track of the completed implementation, exclude livestock unless it's specifically written into the plan. Notify the DNR within 30 days of address or ownership change, and plans don't automatically transfer from one landowner to another, so that's a good thing to know. And if it doesn't happen often, however, if someone goes out and cuts trees without it being in their plan, they could be decertified, and if they receive cost share, they would have to repay that cost share if they were decertified. So that's a quick overview of kind of that manual, those forest stewardship plans for your land. So let's talk a little bit about why forests need to be managed. I think a common theme is that forests manage themselves, and we don't have to do a whole lot to manage them. However, the alternative to that is that in the past, forests have been managed to a great extent, and a lot of times they need us to manage them so that we can improve those forest ecosystems and improve the function, probably to make up for some of the past management errors that have been made in the past. So your management plan, after you have that plan in your hand, the next thing is to figure out what action is needed and figure out how management can be implemented. So as I said before, invasive species control is oftentimes the first thing that I'll talk about, because if you don't manage those and you have an established invasive species component, you're going to release those and they'll be the first ones that take advantage of it. So these are common things that are in forest stewardship plans. Forest stand improvement, also known as non-commercial thinning, or thinning of those mid-story trees that are taking up a lot of blocking up a lot of that sunlight. Prescribed burning is another thing that's common and seems to be growing in interest among landowners to help improve habitat and improve the growth composition. Overstory harvest or commercial thinning is another common thing that's recommended in plans. Tree planting may also be in the plan. Habitat improvements such as brush piles, nest boxes, etc. And there's also the plan, there can be the case made and at certain times to do nothing. That can be a management action if that's the right thing, to let those trees grow and no action is needed. So let's jump into a little bit of these and talk about a little bit more detail. We won't talk about a ton of specifics on this, but I'll give you a little taste of each one of them. So non-native invasive species, also called exotic species, they typically act as interference to sunlight and prevent growth of trees and herbaceous vegetation in that understory. And if we don't have young trees in that stand and healthy trees in the midstory, we're not going to end up with a healthy forest in the future. So we want to make sure that we're managing that understory. So common woody invasive species, just a quick and dirty big three, include bush honeysuckle or myrrh honeysuckle, autumn olive, and multiflora rose. Those are common in many of our woodlands in southern Illinois. We also have some herbaceous ones. Japanese stiltgrass is common. We're seeing more and more Japanese chafflower. Garlic mustard is common as well. So those are the herbaceous plants. So in order to allow trees to establish and grow, these layers really have to be managed so that we're managing that sunlight. And it's important to also know that oak species are not shade tolerant. They're not going to grow through a wall of bush honeysuckle to reach that canopy. So, it's not often that we see thick walls like that of bush honeysuckle. However, that can be the case, and that would be a major issue for management. But a cut stump treatment on the bottom right is a good way to manage those invasives. And I'm sure you guys know more about that after having seen some of the other presentations. So forest stand improvement, or thinning of your forest land, kind of a quick view of what some understory or mid-story cutting will look like. So again, interfering vegetation is what we see in these mid-stories, where a lot of that sunlight can be blocked. So the shade-tolerant species that act as interference, we might see some of those common ones would include American beech in some areas. Sugar maple and ironwood are common shade-tolerant species that establish in the understories, and especially in the absence of fire, will tend to block that sunlight and prevent regeneration. So, these trees have established over time, and will take over without some sort of management. And cutting is the quickest way to impact that layer. So thinning in general reduces the stocking, or the density of those trees, the trees per acre and the basal area per acre. It increases the growth rates of the healthy trees that are left there, removes poorly formed trees that are forked and are more likely to be impacted by windstorms or taken out by ice storms. It may shift the species composition, especially in woodlands managed poorly in the past. And it lets that sunshine into the forest floor and allows that regeneration to take place of those shade intolerant species. Prescribed burning is, like I said, is kind of growing in interest in southern Illinois. The importance of prescribed burning have been looked at and are being used in much of our public land as well as private land. And this is kind of what a low intensity surface fire is going to look like. It's going to burn through the leaf litter, might burn some of the small leaves and twigs. You have the potential to catch some standing dead trees, but for all intents and purposes, the leaves are what carry fire in southern Illinois. So prescribed burns are typically those low intensity fires, removes the leaf litter and allows the seeds to have soil contact for germination. It might kill small trees 2 to 4 inches in diameter, and if you have multiple burns, you can kill some trees that are larger, but typically not real large trees. May help maintain and control some of the competition, especially competition with oak. And since oak trees are fire dependent and fire tolerant, this can help us manage for them. So oak trees have their root collar below the surface of the soil. So even if small oaks are top killed with a fire, they can readily resprout and be more competitive when they have more sunlight and some of that competition is knocked back. And the oak competitors tend to not do as well after fire and tend to not be as competitive. And it can also improve wildlife habitat, open up some of those areas for herbaceous growth, things that deer and turkey browse, and allow them to have more opportunities in burned areas. So how to burn? Most people say, and rightly so, I can't do a burn by myself. So yeah, that's right. You shouldn't do a burn by yourself. However, there are some options and opportunities out there. So to be covered under the Illinois Prescribed Burn Act, which allows you the right to burn on private land, you need to have a burn plan in place, an Illinois EPA smoke permit, and a state certified burn manager and experienced crew to do that burn. So there's some planning and some experience needed to get this done. So there are a couple options out there. The Southern Illinois Prescribed Burn Association helps private landowners to do burns. You have to join their membership. They can write a burn plan for you and bring along and get that EPA smoke permit and bring along a burn manager and experienced crew. So that's an option. The downside to that is that you as the landowner would be required to do the preparation work on site to prepare for it and get ready for it. SIPA is not going to do all the prep work for you. So an option, if you're looking to have somebody do everything, private contractors can do all of those same things and do the preparation work for you. So there are a couple different options here in Southern Illinois, and there are both of those things that you can consider to have a burn done on your place. So timber harvesting is another one that people commonly ask about and can be implemented and may be recommended in some plans. So to talk about timber harvesting, it's important to kind of separate out harvesting or just cutting trees from silviculture. So harvesting is just removing timber without a plan, with the goal being revenue production, making some money off of that. But that oftentimes results in a degraded forest that's not going to be harvestable for 30, 40, or 50 more years. Whereas silviculture is the science and art of tending and regrowing a forest. This would be what a forest stewardship plan would recommend implementing silviculture. This can be used to improve habitat for wildlife, manage watersheds, mimic natural disturbances, manage visual qualities of the forest. It can maintain and improve ecological conditions, promote natural regeneration of the forest, provide sustainable management of your forest products, and provide periodic income. People also can use it for agroforestry practices. So I would encourage you to, if you own land and you're considering harvesting or silviculture, I would encourage you to manage silviculturally. So a harvest, to delve into that a little bit more, you would need to hire a forester to oversee your harvest. Here's what the forester would do. The forester would mark each tree that will be removed. They put a mark about 5 feet above the ground and also a mark on the stump of that tree, so it can be traced after that cutting's been completed. It would measure the species, the volume, and board footage, and grade each one of those trees, and figure a total of volume by species. This would then be used to request competitive bids for your timber. So that would be sent out. Timber buyers can then bid on that timber competitively, and you can compare apples to apples on what different companies might pay for your timber. It's a great way to get competitive prices for your timber and also receive money up front before harvesting takes place to ensure that you're protected. The consultant would also establish a contract to protect your land to make sure that it clearly listed what things would be done after the harvest was completed and how it would look like. And then oversee the harvest operations and ensure that your woodland is properly managed. So again, I would encourage you to go through this process. You're gonna make more off of your harvest going through this process, and you're gonna end up by cutting fewer trees. So advanced regeneration is another thing I want to talk about. It's a key to getting good oak regeneration. And it doesn't mean that you can't go in and thin or harvest some trees before you have oak regeneration. However, it does mean that you have to do that before overstory trees or overstory is removed. So there are a number of silvicultural treatments that can be used to help establish advanced regeneration. But this allows your overstory trees that are there to seed in, create advanced regeneration and natural regeneration, and try to get oak species established, but also increase sunlight for these oak trees to establish. So with that, so these kind of steps that we've talked about all tie in to regrowing a forest, and that's part of, if you're going to manage a forest land, you need to regrow forest at some point in time. So like I said, without establishing young trees, we don't have a future forest. So control that shrub layer in the mid-story through forest stand improvement thinning. That's the cutting of non-merchantable trees. Fire can help control the competition, but only controls small trees and shrubs. And an adequate seed crop is needed, so we need those seeds to drop to the forest floor. And typically the limiting seed crop is the acorns. That's one that occurs periodically, but not every year. And shade intolerant species require adequate sunlight in order to establish and grow. So other factors that may be considered on different sites would be deer browse, the seed source, the soils, etc. Depending on the site, there are a lot of different things that have to be considered. So in conclusion, you want to determine your goals, what you want to do on your land, what you want it to look like in the future. Select an appropriate program that's going to work for you, that you're going to fit into, and that meshes with your goals. Select a forester if you're going into one of those programs that needs a forest stewardship plan, that manual written, and have them work with them to get that plan established and written. Once you have your plan, you can move into implementation of that plan and implementing it year by year to best manage your forest land for your goals. And then enjoy your healthy forest. So get out there, enjoy it, spend time in it, I think is important to consider. So with that, I'll use whatever time we have left to take any questions.
Hey, thanks, Ben. That's a fantastic presentation. We have a couple things here, and then as people put additional questions into the chat box, we'll ask them. First question was, somebody asked, do you have any information or knowledge about the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, ACEP?
I don't have much information about ACEP or how that program works. I haven't worked with that program. Do you know anything about it, Chris?
No, I don't. Alrighty, well, moving on then.
I would recommend on that one to talk with the someone with the USDA Service Center. They could probably provide more direction. And if you go to that link that I provided at the beginning of the presentation, you can track down the appropriate contact information for the county that you live in.
Okay, great. Another question came in. Are plans ever created to specifically discourage wildlife? Maybe they had some conflicts going on.
Yeah, I haven't seen a plan that was specifically written to discourage wildlife. However, when we write tree planting plans, we want to figure out how to mitigate for high levels of deer, that sort of thing. They may use deer repellents or things that can keep deer from browsing those trees, such as tree shelters, or fencing can even be used. So there can be plans that are written to discourage certain wildlife in certain cases. So yeah, I could see that being the case.
Okay, great. There was a couple questions coming in asking, how do you go about finding a forester, or are there a list of foresters out there? How does if somebody wants to start this, how do they find a good consultant forester?
Yeah, you've got a couple of different options out there. The U of I extension webpage should have a list of consulting foresters that operate throughout the entire state of Illinois. It's a pretty big list. It's also very detailed and provides a lot of background information. So you can kind of look at the map that they have with that information and see, which foresters are willing to travel to your area. That's a good start. Alternatively, most of the IDNR district foresters have a regional list, and I keep one myself for the Southern Illinois region, which will, I probably have 10 or 12 consultants on that list that cover this area. So I'd recommend getting both of those lists, figuring out who seems to mesh with your goals, and talk to at least a couple of them to see who seems like they would do a good plan for you.
Great. Right along those same lines, a couple questions about reasonable charge for a forester. How do they charge, by the hour, or value a sale, or by acre? And then also just comment on the cost of having a plan developed.
Yeah, plans can be somewhat costly up front. Typically, they're in my district, they're usually in the ballpark of $12 to $15 an acre. Usually consultants have a minimum fee because going there and doing the inventory is going to take a certain amount of time, and whether you're writing a plan for 10 acres or 200 acres, you still have to write that plan, and it's generally not a whole lot different in the length. So, there may be a minimum, $400 or $600 minimum fee for writing a plan. I usually encourage landowners to go to the NRCS, to their USDA Service Center, to the NRCS side, and you can apply for cost share for that management plan, which could help with that cost. So that's a good option if you're looking at getting a new plan.
Good deal. And any comments on the charges and rates for other services the foresters provide, whether it's facilitating a timber harvest or something like that?
Yeah, usually a harvest is somewhere around the 10% range of the total sale, but that can be variable too. You may want to check with a couple of different people and see what their costs are. Some consultants I've heard of doing an hourly fee for a harvest as well. And then the range of costs for TSI and invasive control really highly depends on the coverage and the level of cutting that's being done. So that one's highly variable. So I wouldn't comment on that one, but there can be quite a big range. And again, that's, I think the best thing to do there is compare multiple contractors.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, we're past 3, so I'm going to give you one more question. If somebody here in Illinois wants to reach out and find their district forester, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, you should be able to go to the IDNR webpage. There's a drop down at the top left, and go to the forestry section. On the forestry page, there's a map that provides a list of the foresters for your respective counties and shows that district coverage. So for example, my district covers Franklin, Williamson, Jackson, Union, and Alexander counties. And it would list me showing a a red line around those areas and my contact information on the DNR page.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ben. This is a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate you taking time. And I want to thank everybody that attended any of these presentations throughout this week. Just a reminder that these have been recorded. We'll make them available, and we'll send a note to everybody when the videos are up and available. So thanks a lot, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your time this week for our webinar series. And thanks again, Ben.
Thank you.